go ahead and launch a poll to get us started. You probably wonder why we're talking about leadership when it comes to data, when usually we ask technical questions when it comes to data management, and we will divulge why. Oh, yes. Somebody asked if you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Absolutely. We would welcome that. In 2 weeks, we always post the webinar, and we have links to our LinkedIn on all the articles as well. So, Jeff, awesome. Thank you.
Jeff's so much faster than me. He's like,
So good. Okay, let's see here. So we have 36 votes in. Does anyone else want to participate before I close it? Because we're getting some really awesome answers and would love to hear from more of you. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So only one person said that the executives love their data, and that's not surprising at all. 4 people said their executives think it's fine and they don't, which is more surprising because usually executives are pretty critical of everything. And what I'm not too surprised about, Allie and Jeff, the proportion over half saying that the executives want clean data but won't put any money behind it. I'm sure is something we've all, you see you nodding. You want to give us a little context and do a hypothetical situation? Real magic.
So I just went through a planning process with a client at the end of last year, and they wanted to build territories for the first time in their org's history. And so, whenever you cut in territories, you have some first principles thinking around what data dimensions to slice by. They were a fully remote team, right? So they don't want to do geography. So we had to use other data points. And then when you look at the data points that they selected, the completion rates within the CRM were around 40%. So I asked theoretically, I'm like, okay, so in order to have like pretty good, cutting season for your territories, what do you think is a realistic quality bar for you to reach? And I'm like, we should get to like 85 or 90%.
Never going to happen.
I mean, you could, or given amount of time and effort, right? If they
Money.
certain amount of calories to go get there. And so the question was, okay, theoretically, how do we close that gap for you? And it comes down to time and money.
So that's critically important for lead scoring as well. I've been in organizations where they haven't run through that exercise, and 50% is actually pretty good compared to what I was seeing, some of which only 8% of the values. And they were using like 15 variables. 10 of the fields had next to nothing in them. And it's so critical to understand that when you're doing something like lead scoring, you're diluting the score significantly the more values you put in there that aren't going to be populated. Plus, blank values converted at a higher rate than the ones they wanted. All of that's bad. So, Allie, do you want to give an example while I'm bringing up the deck?
I mean, we have pretty clean data, but when I got in here, we were doing some weird stuff to do segmentation, where we would push data into unknown algorithms that someone else built in the company just to do segmentation, like out of our data warehouse. So it was totally blind. You didn't know how it was actually being done. And then it would randomly push values back into their Pardot at the time. And I was like, why are we going this way? This seems really hard to do when you could just do it directly. So that was just one thing that I came in and kind of worked through with the team to make the data cleaner and understand how we were segmenting.
So we're going to be talking through survey results I had the good luck of analyzing and writing up for OpenPrice. They surveyed over 150 people spanning operations positions. It was a pretty even split between RevOps, sales ops, and marketing ops. So we had, and skewed a little bit more heavily towards IT and professional services, and B2B, skewed very heavily. So before we jump into the details, why don't we go around the horn and introduce ourselves? Why don't we start with Allie, go to Jeff, and then I'll round us off.
Cool. I'm Allie Rowland, the VP of Revenue Ops at Help Catalyst. I've been doing some level of operations work for almost 20 years now. I also have a demand gen background in marketing, so I'm deep marketing ops, but I am overseeing marketing and sales ops right now.
And I'm Jeff Ignacio, head of revenue operations at Keystone AI. I also own and create content within revenue operations and a newsletter, as well as a podcast. I partner with RevOps Co-op. If you've been part of the RISE community and taken the courses, you've probably come across my content. I've been in revenue operations for about 12 or 13 years now. Prior to that was in sales and FP&A. So I have a varied background, and I was thrown into ops without really knowing what it was, and I fell in love with the craft and have been doing it ever since.
Such a familiar tale, just kind of finding yourself in there because of some kind of acumen. I'm Camela Thompson. Right now, I'm head of marketing for the RevOps Co-op. Before here, I was in operations for 15 years, spanning marketing, sales, and CS ops. I've managed, been an admin for just about any CRM I can think of, even Zoho. It's not great. And then also have been admin for a lot of marketing automation platforms and a database administrator. So I'm kind of a well-rounded nerd. Like I mentioned, I'm going to run through the survey results and try to track my time and run through it fairly quickly. And then we'll round out to Jeff and then Allie to talk through some specifics. But as always, if you have any questions, please do throw them into the chat or Q&A. So let's dig into the survey. The things that stood out to me, though, are what I'll focus more on. 99% of folks struggle with technical data quality. And I think all of us that have been doing RevOps for any amount of time at all, that's not surprising. Technical data quality refers to things like missing, inaccurate data, stale data, and duplicates, those sorts of things. So when we look at even Salesforce saying 91% of data is either missing, stale, or any variation in between, this isn't a big surprise to any of us. What was more surprising is that 42% of people were willing to say it was good enough, along with another 11% that were excellent. But 71% of the population of respondents said we actually can't execute as well as we could because of the poor quality of our data. So the big question that we kept asking throughout the report is good enough really good enough? And if it's impacting your ability to execute as a business, I would argue that we need to do a little bit more work before we declare it good enough. So the other big thing, and this is why we asked a big question about how your leaders think about the data, what we noticed is that our operations respondents were very focused on a technical definition of data quality, whereas most of the hurdle standing between their company using the data and really getting a lot out of it had to do with leadership, actions, and opinions. So we saw a lot of people complaining about leadership's unwillingness to force usage of core systems. They had a really poor understanding of what was possible, and we saw that in the magic elf answer in our poll question. And then no one seems to want to take ownership, and that could mean pulling into the resources or being responsible for a portion of the data quality. So without ownership, it's really hard to get traction on a core project. So digging into that a bit more, 79% said they don't have a standard data quality definition. So they haven't gone around and asked different executives, what do you mean when you say our data quality is bad? 55% said that their executives aren't enforcing usage of key systems, and 48% said their leadership team doesn't understand what's possible. So what's keeping you from using AI in your day-to-day? And a lot of folks are saying that it's a lack of access to high-quality data. Others, we're going to call out restrictions due to security compliance. We found that skewed very heavily in larger organizations, not as much of a hesitation for smaller organizations, which leaned on lack of skills, cost, and limited access to data. Larger organizations were more focused on security compliance and resistance to change within the organization, which kind of makes sense to somebody who's worked in organizations of all sizes. The larger it is, it's like steering a big cruise boat instead of a tugboat. A little harder to turn. So, how people are using AI was surprising to me because I guess it shouldn't have been. People are continuing to focus very highly on the very difficult things to answer when you have low data quality instead of things like segmentation, automating, or enhancing forecasting, and some of the other smaller problems, I would say, like normalizing data and other things. They're really focused on trying to fix the outbound problem in go to market and generating more interest. And that's a huge thing to tackle. I would say, Allie, I would love to have you touch on this before we move on, because I found this is really tied to a lack of understanding of key persona and messaging issues and putting AI behind it. What are your thoughts on it?
I think that if you don't have that right infrastructure for your buying unit, for identifying who the buyers are, who the target accounts are, understanding who the customer is, it's not going to matter if you were running AI on top of it. You've got to have that data in your system and operationalize that so that what you're running on top of that AI piece is going to give you what you need out of it. A lot of people start to run AI things, but they don't have that foundational data in place to really drive the right outcomes. And so then they're like, well, AI isn't working for us, or it's not giving me what I need.
And it changes so much over such a short period of time that it's not a great idea to just throw it out altogether. I mean, outbound, you should probably get your other stuff in line first. But yeah, some of these other things, try. Jeff, would love you to touch on some of the, and I might be wrong in remembering that you've put forward, but some of the use cases around product usage and customer behavior. Am I remembering that incorrectly?
Oh, I've managed revenue operations and marketing all the way to CS. So I have era of battle scars across all three functions.
So in terms of viability of AI for analyzing customer behavior when it comes to product data, what are your thoughts?
Hey, Camela, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
I've had my fair share of issues across all three departments, right? Supporting revenue operations. Happy to provide some feedback. But when it comes to the product org, they're always wanting to know a couple of things. They want to know what's happening with the sales forecast. They want to know exactly which feature on the roadmap is going to lead to how much revenue unlock within the pipeline. They're going to want to know why we lost opportunities, both for existing customers and for prospects, particularly when it comes to deficiencies within the product feature set. They're going to want to know the type of behaviors that are happening within the application of your software business. They want to know exactly what are the drivers for whether a customer is going to renew or churn. And that those feedback loops are sometimes buried within the organization. And so we want to make sure that we surface those insights.
Yeah. And relying on humans to score customers historically been problematic, I think. So looking at product usage data can at least give you another layer to analyze. So to wrap it up and move on to other folks on the call, good enough might not be good enough. Data quality is a huge hurdle in adopting AI because if your model's learning from existing information and that information's wrong, it's going to be spewing out incorrect information. And AI is not always the biggest problem that needs to be solved first. So let's move on to Jeff.
All right. So I'm going to spend a few minutes going over the impact of your data governance, your data model, and ultimately the output, which is the quality of that data, which is then an input to your decision making. So we're going to go over a couple of examples as a revenue operations team, how we can unlock stronger, strategic, and timely decision making through your data. When you're thinking about supporting your data governance model, there's a certain level of investment. So there's the manual method collection of getting your data into your CRM. And then there's purchasing your data. And then there's sometimes a blend. Obviously, we're going to want to exercise as a revenue operations organization to make sure that we're bringing the data quality and the data completion percentages that we're looking for up and down our entire revenue stack. Not every data point needs to be addressed. We want to make sure that when we think about the roadmap of what areas we want to support and fix first, we want to create a prioritization model. Okay, so we'll go through some examples. So recently, I think almost everyone here in the room has probably completed their annual planning. Some level of annual planning is a true bottoms up and tops down motion. Those type of organizations are going to work between finance and go to market. The earlier you have your planning process, the better. So for the largest organizations, you're looking at July, August as a starting time frame, whether you're on a calendar fiscal or on a January fiscal. Now, for smaller organizations, I often see the one mistake is starting your planning late, right? So starting as late as October, November, December, that means you're not getting your territories and your comp plans out to your sales team until after the year has started. So when it comes to annual planning, we want to work backwards from our intended goals. How do we want the year to start for the entire go-to-market organization? Whether it's a customer success manager, a sales rep, or an SDR, we want to start as early as possible so that we can lead into our company and sales kickoff with the right amount of enablement and training backed by the right strategy. So let's go over an example. I gave the example of a territory project. And when we think about planning, we're doing addressable market. We're looking at product strategy, product roadmap, aligning that to the segmentation. And all of that is going to require a ton of data and a ton of analysis. Post segmentation, we're looking at territory cutting. And then in parallel, if not sequential, but I would recommend parallel, we're looking at sales capacity modeling, identifying how many headcounts you're going to need, developing your sales comp plans and your quotas. And we want to land all of that heavy work right before the beginning of the year. So where can you go wrong? If you don't have the right data, you could potentially be going down the wrong path of which markets or which segments to go after. You're also assigning the wrong accounts. So if you have a certain percentage of your territories that are going out to your sales reps and they're not properly vetted or scored, you could have a strong pushback from the sales org and a lack of trust that what you're doing and what you're pushing out in terms of your territories is the right move. Now, let's say, for example, you've developed a $20, $30 million ARR business. You probably have one major SKU that's driving 80% of your revenue. Once you get past that $20, $30 million mark, what I highly suggest to a lot of chief revenue officers is finding that second act that's going to drive another 20, 30 million of performance for your top line. The way to get there is going to be collecting some of this useful data and having a brainstorm around what are those adjacencies that could lead to a second product. And if you do not have the right data, particularly coming from your conversational intelligence tools, customer advisory boards, you could probably overinvest in the wrong area, right? So you could be slow to market. An example of this, I once worked at a company that developed HR analytics solutions, and our first product was a massive hit. We built talent acquisition, which is, recruiters have a pretty large budget when it comes to human resource departments. And then the second product we built was called workforce analytics, which was at the time a very mathematical Excel type interface for the HR department. And it just did not strike a chord. And we had overinvested about 1.5 years worth of engineering. And quite frankly, we did not see the attach rates that we were expecting with those software sales. Had we listened to our customers, we would have learned that the second largest area that was adjacent to our talent acquisition module was learning and development. So one, you recruit the talent, but you need to retain them. And a natural complementary solution would have built a learning and development module in addition to our talent acquisition. And then lastly is the investment balance. I teach this quite a bit, particularly when it comes to marketing investment. When you're over-investing in certain marketing channels, you reach the saturation point. The same thing can be done when you're trying to complete your data set. So what is the right level of investment in order to close your data gaps? One, it's going to look like tools and or people and or process. If you push process onto the org, you may be pushing process at the wrong time. You may be pushing process onto the wrong people. An example of that would be asking your sales reps to fill in every single account plan, which feeds back into your CRM. That's never really a good look because it takes too long. Second is to purchase a data set. That's probably the fastest way, but also you want to verify that what's going into your system is correct. I can't tell you how many times I've purchased a data enrichment provider to find that Google is listed as like a pet shop or something just completely wrong. And so you have to take the time to make sure that the data going into your CRM from a trusted provider is actually trustworthy, not to throw shade on any data providers, but we want to make sure that you get the proper enrichment that you're looking for. So just a couple of ideas there on strategic missteps and budget woes.
Data providers are often used to doing bake-offs. I highly recommend it. 100 accounts from your system, give them to all of them and see which one seems the most right. And then figure out if they threw a human at it to tweak what they have in their system.
Also add in figuring out the data recipe that fits your company. It's usually multiple data providers and not just one. Not everyone's as lucky as healthcare providers are. We have
Right.
Definitive Healthcare, which has insanely good data at the account level, not necessarily at a contact level. Contact is still questionable. So we still have to supplement with other providers. But that would be my 2 cents on the data provider issue.
Yeah, and European contact data is its own thing that requires a lot of operations, tends to be held responsible for privacy, whether you like it or not. So making sure marketing understands how GDPR and opt-ins work. It's always a good idea. Jeff, we'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, so I'll give you another example of a data enrichment. I worked with a customer that was building a mobile application for dog grooming businesses. So imagine you have your pet dog and they need a haircut. That's their target market. You would be astonished how many of these owners have Gmail and Yahoo email addresses and no website presence. Imagine trying to enrich your data for that type of business. It's almost impossible. I stress all the time the importance of feedback loops. So there is the concept of grabbing the data from a third-party enrichment provider. There's also the concept of scraping your own data. There's also now the power of using large language models. Beware, you're not quite sure about the level of quality, but you can kind of combine all these thoughts together. But there's also a layer of data that's collected when you're actually having a conversation with a prospect. Now, a lot of that data is tucked away in audio files. And so that feedback loop, I think the old way of doing operations would be to create disposition fields and then have the team post-call actually record the data that you need in your CRM. Now you can actually be a little bit more thoughtful by calling, an LLM, parsing through the call, or writing and supporting as being a complementary agent, supporting the reps. I think that's a wonderful thing. I encourage everyone to take a stab at it and build that into their own stack. Now, that data set is not meant to be just data in the field for completion's sake. It's meant to be reviewed and studied. So you need cadences to review the data. So pipeline counts is a wonderful thing, win-loss reviews, product councils. So make sure that you lean on your first party in addition to your third party data. When you combine that first party data that you're collecting plus that third party, that gives you a competitive edge against your competition, because who does it better relative to your peer set, I think compounds greatly over time. And then the last point here is, how would your decision-making change if you had more confidence in your data? Well, I don't know if you've ever experienced this. You walk into a meeting, your head of marketing walks in, your head of sales walks in, they talk about pipeline, but they're both speaking past each other. And you spend 30, 40 minutes saying, is that right? That doesn't look right. And you've derailed a good 2/3 to a half of your meeting. And this is a very expensive meeting, right? You take the hourly rate of, your executives, and you're just crunching all this time away from useful, productive time. And so you want to walk into those meetings with the right data set, some modicum of insights, and you want to be able to pre-read and prep your leadership team. And that's where I think RevOps can add value, is that the confidence in the data is very high before you get into the meeting. So you can get into a place where you're brainstorming, norming, and forming the right ideas for the business to move forward.
I'll also add something real quick to this before we jump into the next slide. But I would say too that more data isn't necessarily the good thing. So just because you can go buy data about your potential buyers or accounts, it may not be meaningful or relevant to your company. So focus on what is important in your buying cycle. For us, net patient revenue on a hospital system is really important. Bed count's really important. Those things help us target the right hospital systems for our types of solutions. Anything else can be noise. And so making sure that those important parts are important things that you're focusing on to define what a good customer looks like is the only thing you're bringing in.
And that goes to a question we had from an anonymous attendee about what data enrichment tools we recommend, and they listed a few. I think that really speaks to it. So if your sales team is complaining about mobile phone numbers, that's always going to be problematic. I think it's really critical to understand how you calculate your ICP, how you segment, and making sure those fields are accurate and working back from there. And you may need multiple data providers to always get certain things right. So, for example, you may use a Clay or Apollo for a lot of your industry data, things like that, and then rely on something with built with to get technology if you're building on top of web-based technology. I think it's also really, really important as part of your evaluation process to figure out and ask ahead of time who owns the data, because the last thing you want to do is to have some provider try to rip all the information out when you uninstall them. So make sure to ask a lot of questions before you purchase that software, because I know a lot of folks have fallen into those contractual traps. We also had a question about how do you deal with a leadership team who treats sales ops like an encyclopedia of data? They just want to press a button and get random reports. And I think this really speaks to Jeff getting an Ellie, getting executive buy-in on a data dictionary and getting them to commit. And it is definitely influencing up. It is part of our job. And it's tedious, but to sit down and get everyone to agree so that we're speaking the same language in those meetings, because we've all seen them fall apart when two executives report a different number for the same metric.
So this is the concept of reactive RevOps versus proactive RevOps. And this is the concept of where RevOps earns a seat at the table, right? Some folks will say RevOps should have a seat at the table. I don't believe that. If you don't earn it, you're going to be a report. You're going to go fetch reports all day long for your team, and shoulder taps are going to be soup du jour. Instead, what I would do is elevate revenue operations to become an executive level function. You need to put yourself in the shoes of your VP of sales, your CRO, your VP of marketing, anticipate exactly what they might ask. And if you can get to a place where you're answering ahead of time what they're going to ask, you don't have to have 100%, reading their mind. But you're also leveling yourself up, because now you're putting yourself in that particular position. And you're already asking, well, I know the board meeting is coming up. I know the management meeting is coming up. These are topics and whispers that I've heard in the hallways. These are the core, incredible topics that are burning. So let's go ahead and let me solve the problem, address it, and come up with hypotheses and solutions, and then report that up to the team, right? Now, once you get to that place, you can get to a position where the KPIs and the reports that you supply to the organization are canned. These are the dashboards and reports that we sanction as the ops team that should answer your first click and your second click questions. Now, when you get to a place where you're asking third level, fourth level order of questions, obviously the canned reports I'm building aren't going to get you there. So that's where I'm going to set up a queue or a ticket for you to make a request in order to get that data. And I know that there are going to be times where I'm going to be inundated with a ton of requests. So I want to make sure that I make the trade-offs to push out some of this other tactical and daily work to make room and space to make sure that I have the headroom to address those reports and questions that I know are inevitably going to come up the day or two before an MBR or a board meeting.
It's such a great point, because when I went from providing board reports to actually representing marketing in the board, light bulb moments went off, and I'm like, oh, that's why they asked these questions. I would have answered them completely differently. So really pushing them on, okay, but what exactly are you trying to answer? And then looking at patterns and looking for anomalies and differences that help you anticipate the questions they'll get asked by the board and the questions they'll then ask you. So really easy way to impress people is to look at pipeline growth quarter over quarter and learn the patterns. When you're behind on the pattern, you can coordinate with the executive team to get well planned mid-flight, instead of learning at the end that you're way behind on pipeline growth. These are the kinds of things, insights instead of reports, which are also important, but providing insights is so much more important than just creating reports.
I would just say that, you just need to align with your executive leader on exactly what they want to report out on. And if they don't have a point of view on that, which is problematic, and that happens, you need to be able to help them get to that point of view that they need to be at. You need to understand, in general, what any sort of marketing or sales team should be reporting out on. What are those basic top line metrics that you have to have? That's table stakes that's not going to change company to company. And then you drill down below that and start asking them more questions about the specific need, the specific board that you're working with. Are there people that like get real in the weeds, or are the board members like really high level? That will help you bring the right level of insights to that executive. If you notice something, speak up. Like a lot of times, I think we sit here and we look at all this data and all these reports, and we know something's off, and we know something should be changed. And sometimes we don't speak up because we either don't feel comfortable, or maybe we think we'll get shot down or whatever. You have a voice, use it, and really sit your executive down and help them understand why they are or not performing.
But before we move on, I have another question. Is there any opportunity to use AI even if my data is unclean? And I would say it depends on whether you're talking about machine learning or generative AI. So machine learning are like algorithms based on existing data, like lead scoring. They're looking at patterns in your existing data set. Generative AI has the potential to scrape public-facing information on the internet and provide you with additional data points. So anything to add there, folks?
So I just built out a flow for a software company that's selling to accountants. And much like grooming businesses, a lot of these accountants are really small. They have Yahoo email addresses. They don't even have their own website. They have a page on Yelp or Facebook pages. That's like their website, which is bananas to me. So the flow it works like this. They submit an email with 2 or 3 other identifiers on the form. It sends a webhook to Clay. Clay is the tool of choice for this particular project. And then I had their AI basically search the web and find the relevant information and provide confidence. And then I did the scoring right then and there for the lead. And then I had a set of enrichments to scrape just the URL from the data that was found from the first agent. And then that's what fed back into their particular CRM for the website. So you could technically use AI to search the web, scrape, refine the data, and then give you some level of reasoning, and then put the data back in the CRM. Now, this org gets so many leads, they still have to go into the lead, click on the website, do a little bit of research to make sure that it works. But my hope is that it cuts down like 30 seconds of their own research time down to 10. And that 20-second compounds almost every single lead. And then the way the SDRs disposition the lead is feedback onto the Clay setup, right? Like, is AI doing what it's supposed to do? If it's like 80% right, that's a home run, right? If it's like 20% right, then all I've done is thrown more chaos into their stack. And I won't really know until some time passes.
Yeah. Addition, augmentation, and normalization, yes. Analysis, trend, insights, no, if that makes sense. So I want to make sure, Allie, that we need to cover your section.
Okay. So, we'll spend a little time talking about how we improved our data quality and some of the methodologies that we went through. We'll talk about the maturity process, and that you can't just flip a switch and be like, we're data mature today. Like, that's just not how it works. We can talk a little bit about what automation is going to do for you and how to balance that human touch with some automation. Next slide. So the data maturity model, when I got to Health Catalyst, we were in this interesting place where our sales team and our sales processes were a lot more mature than our marketing processes. So we had really great account data. All of our account data comes from Definitive, like I mentioned before. It's kind of just a nice perk of being in the healthcare business instead of, just general mass B2B can, sell to anyone. They have exceptional account data for us. And so we already had our account infrastructure set up according to the way that the account hierarchies look in Definitive, and that comes in all the time. So we don't have to worry about those things. We get the relevant account data that we need from Definitive. So all of that was coming in on the account side. But on the human side, on the people side, leads and contacts, we weren't doing so great. We had a lot of gaps in the data, and we did not have some basic information for segmentation. It wasn't clean. There were some duplicates. So we sort of started from scratch, and then we identified, one, we needed a more mature marketing automation tool. Pardot wasn't cutting it. We had done a bunch of acquisitions, and we needed to be able to do a much deeper levels of automation that you just can't get out of Pardot. So we moved to Marketo. We did that within my first 3 months there. And then we started doing some cleanliness and completion exercises. So we did have Zoom info at the time, and we were using that for some of our contact data. Then we brought in a data orchestration tool to help us really refine some of those data points, our normalization done, our capitalization, like the most basic parts of that contact level data, bucketing our titles into job function and job role so that it was much easier for us to say, I need all the decision makers in the CFO org of a hospital for this campaign. Things like that, just to me, was like basic level data completion. That was our first piece. We now we have very little duplication. If we do, it's because somebody genuinely used a separate email address or something like that to end up with 2 records for the same person. We have very little of that. And we're very standardized in terms of, how we look at basic segmentation on a person level. Then we went into the deeper parts of segmentation, where we're looking at personas and buying units, and we're grouping those folks together in a smart way. And then any of our other GTM motions, where we are talking about looking at the different orgs within the hospital systems and how they're the buyers for certain of our solutions versus other solutions. So really getting into deeper segmentations based on our go-to-market strategy. That was our second level of this. And then we could get to more of the optimization pieces, much more complex automation around how we identify our buyers, how we use Sixth Sense and sort of more advanced tools to help us identify how we use Sixth Sense and intent data and really bringing that into a workflow, advanced analytics as to what's working and what's actually leading to a deal or not leading to a deal, and then much more sophisticated revenue forecasting and reporting. We put in a CPQ, which we didn't have before. That was a huge turning point for us. So now we could understand what renewals were coming in and forecast those renewals in a place that we couldn't do that when I got there. So if there is a walk, crawl, run to everything, and it's not a one and done deal. It took us about 2 years to get to this place. Okay, next slide. Not everybody understands and thinks in terms of databases the way we do. I always joke around that my brain works like a smart list in Marketo. I am always starting big and figuring out how to whittle down using logic to get down to where I need to be. Not everybody thinks like that or understands that. So you have to really simplify what you need down to here is the problem and here are solutions. And you've got to be able to explain the impact of the business to that solution. You can go ask for money all over the place, but you're asking the business to make an investment. So you need to be able to identify what that impact to the business is going to be. Is it going to be that it's going to add more revenue in some way? Is it going to be that it's going to make better internally so that there's more productivity from the teams? Is it going to be that you have more clarity in your data so that you can make more better informed decisions? And what is that impact of that decision that you could be making? You have to be able to explain that to them in very simplistic terms. And then the third part is you've got to use real world metaphors. The other day I was talking about, this is going to sound crazy to all of us on this call, but we had a digital marketer that didn't understand that the forms that we have on the websites or that we're using on LinkedIn, that we need to have a corresponding program in Marketo to catch them. And they just weren't making the correlation. They were like, but you have an integration. So what do you mean? Well, you can turn a faucet on and you can just let it flow, or you can get a cup and be like, I'm going to pour the water into this cup so I can drink it. Or I'm going to put a pot there so I can go boil it for some pasta. Or here's a big mop bucket because I'm going to go clean something. You have different reasons that you're trying to get that water out of that spigot, and you need to put it in a place to go get that next action. And that like sent some light bulbs off and was like, oh, okay. So imagine when you're talking like up to an executive that maybe has not done anything technical, you've got to use those real world metaphors to help them understand why something is important or not important.
My sink was leaking this morning, Jeff. Relatable. Everyone loved your analogy, Allie. Erwin just dropped a link to his report. Do follow it. It's really focused on customer data as opposed to all data. All right. So AI misadventures. I think we've talked about this a bit already, but speaking to when can I use AI with bad data and when shouldn't I? Back in one of my previous roles, a startup, we were using the sales manager got sold and really excited about an automated lead scoring product. And we had very few closed won opportunities to train it against. And the meetings we were setting weren't optimized enough to train against that benchmark instead, because a lot of the meetings were with wrong people and the conversion rates were below industry standards. So I had to rip it all out. So that's an example where we didn't have the minimum data set necessary for this particular machine learning to learn what to train against and what was a success. So really be careful when somebody says AI, what do you really mean? And what is it doing? Is it scraping the web? Is it generating stuff? Is it using a baseline and growing from there? How are you figuring this out? Because if you don't have accurate data or complete data in place to train a machine learning model against, you're going to get really wonky results that aren't going to benefit your business.
I have an example, and it's more about first-party data. This is not generative AI. This is AI on top of your own data set. So think about using 6th Sense for intent signals. We were running, like we had installed 6th Sense. We were so excited. We're going to be like, it's going to tell us everybody that's come to our website. And it's going to show us who we should focus on. Oh, so excited. And one of our products was just like blowing up and showing intent all over the place. And I was like, this can't be. Like, there's not that many people that want MitoWare. I know it's one of our better selling products, and it turns out that on our website, there was a credential, like a course that you could take that is free, that gets you some credits or I forget, like some certification. And you have to go there to sign up for it. And we do these like a lot throughout the year. So we were showing all this intent from people just coming to that one webpage to sign up for that course and had nothing to do with them going to buy anything from us. So, really understanding what that is. So that's when we started having people, we had to do checks and balances on anything that 6th Sense was telling us so that it wasn't just an immediate like, oh my God, go look at all this intent that we're just like leaving on the table. We had to, really refine that.
Were they able to work with you to refine that and exclude that traffic?
They were, yeah.
Good. And then let's chat automation. What are the kinds of things we should be thinking about when it comes to automation?
So there's like a couple of use cases that I've put together recently. My org is on a HubSpot Enterprise. I'm not sure exactly which package we're on, but we don't have webhooks, right, in our workflows. So I ended up using a workflow automation tool to catch those webhooks and to call out to an open source LLM that we've self-hosted, right? We use that setup to enrich the leads. I think 8 out of 10 leads that come into our website are actually folks looking for a job. We had all of those leads previously going into our go-to-market leads Slack channel. They weren't going to HR directly. So AI, our initial misadventure in our lead routing was that we were inundating our go-to-market leads channel to the point that no one ever looked at it. So we would miss lead. We weren't looking at it. So I basically created a new workflow automation that would sort the leads based on the context, because we actually have an open text field on our form, and we collect a bunch of really rich information. But we don't have like clever drop downs to tell you exactly where to route it to. So we had to use these LLMs, these AIs to sort out what was happening. In my testing, when we first built out the automation, it was probably 7 out of 10, like pretty good, right? I wouldn't rate it a 10 out of 10, And so it was just giving my executives like heartburn, like that the lead routing system wasn't working as intended. So we finally hammered it out to a point where we were getting like I would say 95% accuracy on where it should be routing to. So whenever you're working with AI, don't just trust that a single step in your workflow automation is going to get things right. You actually have to have the initial judgment, the agent making a judgment where it should go. Then you should have another agent that's doing the QA. And then maybe you should have another agent doing double QA. And then if you have like double agreement, then it should lead you to a point where you don't have to, that you've got the call right from the agents, and then it routes to the right place. So when you're building your AI agent, don't be afraid to put a lot more steps in it. You're making them work as if they're like a human. And so, yeah, don't rely on a single step in your AI and then expect the output to be correct. You have to test these things rigorously.
So main takeaway, we're running low on time, so I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So here is a link to the report, QR code. I believe OpenPrize is sending out a data quality. It's not really a checklist. It's like a step-by-step how to figure out what to address first, how to work with leadership to get agreement, and then what to do. Are there other questions out there? Oh, yes. And don't forget to take the survey on the way out. But are there other questions before we start talking a little bit more about automation? So really good tip I heard is if you can draw out a workflow, it's a good candidate for automation. But Jeff, I also heard you say something really smart, which is if you're doing something infrequently and the lift is or the lift is small, it's not really a great candidate. So where do you both kind of set the threshold at what you will consider from an ask and what you'll kind of educate the person about it?
I mean, for me, this is going to sound weird. We don't get a lot of requests for automation. Well, our teams they just don't think that way. So anything that we automate comes straight from us. That we are like, this is too much work for us, or this seems crazy that we're doing this in a manual way. Let's bring some level of automation in to overcome this. It's usually us driving that conversation. And a lot of times people don't even know that we're doing it on the back end. And it's to make things connect the dots, right? Needs it to be. Or maybe it's to alleviate work on our teams so that we can be smarter and work smarter and not harder on stuff. So that's, for me, there's not really what I run into the past was more like marketers wanting to do insane workarounds to do something simple. And then you would have to educate them on the way that you're describing this is not really the most effective way. What we would suggest you do is XYZ, kind of map it out for them. But, to me, there's no downside into automating something unless the automation, like taking the time to make the automation, is so much harder than doing the task.
I still subscribe to Forrester's original 2x2 called the Relative Productivity Matrix. And the 2x2 goes like this. One is your internal facing work or your external facing work. And then the other axis is you're directly engaging with a sales motion or indirectly. So wherever you're indirectly and internal, that's absolute work that you want to streamline. And you don't know what you don't know sometimes, right? As an operator. And so what I like to do is every once in a while do a sidecar session with my SDRs or sellers or marketers and understand what are some processes where you've had to rely on spreadsheets or a Google Doc that I'm not aware of. And I look and mimic those processes and I understand exactly where they're spending time. And if I start to ask them, how much time are you spending on this, say in a day? And do you do this every day? Do you do this every week? And you can start to compound the amount of time. And then those are really excellent candidates to automate. That's on the external use case. Then there's an internal use case for ops, which is like, what are processes that we as an ops org are currently doing that takes way too much time, that prevents us from taking on some higher value added work for the organization. So those are candidates to, they're like features on a product org. You want to identify what those are, stack, rank them. And then like Ali said, like what is the cost to build, maintain, and continue the ownership of that automation? So that may be a good process to do repeatedly over time.
And I love that you're asking how often, how long does it take? Because then you can extrapolate a cost to the business for not automating it and create a strong argument. Well, we are at time. Everybody have a wonderful day. Don't forget to take the survey, and we'll catch you all at the next webinar or so.
Thank you.
Y'all.